Hi, hello there friends, my name's Emma, I'm the Bookish Princess. I have a very exciting video for you guys today. It is going to be my You Readathon wrap-up. So this month I hosted my first ever readathon, the You Readathon. It went throughout October. There were 4 different challenges, all very spooky themed, Disney themed. So many of you guys played along and it's been so much fun to see all of your posts. If you haven't yet, I would definitely recommend going and checking out the hashtag on Twitter, on Instagram, here on YouTube. It's been so much fun to see how you guys interpret all the challenges. You are all so creative and clever, and I've added so many new books to my TBR. So this video is going to be my wrap-up of what I read for the You Readathon. I thought I'd try to make it a little bit fun, a little bit different. We could celebrate Halloween together. So since there are 4 different challenges, I'm going to try to film in 4 different places to kind of wrap up and tell you about each of the different challenges. I thought I'd start us off with a beautiful fall ramble in the woods. The leaves are just so beautiful this time of year. So the first challenge we're going to talk about was your park-inspired costume. So either a book that inspires something in the park, so maybe like the original text that Walt took and then made an attraction based on, or a book that was inspired by the park. So I read 2 different tales for this challenge, which I feel like one of them could kind of count for 2 of the challenges, but the first one is The Swiss Family Robinson by Johann Wyss. This is the original that inspired the treehouse at Walt Disney World. If you've never walked up that treehouse, you should totally stop and check it out sometime because it's absolutely amazing. There are all, I mean, you can kind of see on the cover there are like multiple levels and like multiple houses and rooms, and it's fun when you're walking through the treehouse. There are little like plaques explaining the different rooms and like, oh, the organ is here and the kitchen is here, and like they have this cool pulley system that brings all the water out. I had never read the original Swiss Family Robinson, confession. I am still in the midst of finishing this, but I'm definitely planning to finish it. I've really been enjoying it so far. So I also read, this has been my year for like survival tales, I read Robinson Crusoe earlier this year, which was actually a reread, but I really enjoyed it. I liked that book the first time I read it too. So it's fun to kind of compare and contrast because this, of course, is a whole family. There are 4 sons, a man, his wife, and their 4 sons. And also in Robinson Crusoe, he's more of a true castaway because the ship and almost everything on it gets destroyed. Whereas in Swiss Family Robinson, they're actually able to get a lot more off of the ship. That was a common theme for both of them. The first thing you do when you get shipwrecked on an island is try to get as much of the stuff salvaged from the ship as you can. I feel like the next time I walk through that treehouse at Disney World, it will be with brand new eyes and it'll be so much fun because I've never known like the complete story. When I've walked through and read the plaques in the past, it's always been a little bit like, oh, okay, that's what this room is for. But now I can be like, oh, okay, that's just like this scene in the original book. I think that George Lucas actually really liked the Swiss Family Robinson. You know that scene with Luke where he gets pulled down by the sea monster in the trash compactor? I think that is inspired by Swiss Family Robinson. Sadly, the Swiss Family Robinson treehouse at Disneyland is now a Tarzan themed treehouse, which I guess I can understand why they did it, but it's kind of fun to have some like non-Disney brand things in the parks. I feel like it just makes it feel richer and more different. It's fun when there are more stories represented. So the second book I read for this challenge was The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. This is from a collection of short stories. It is available on Kindle. So many of these books, these old books, are available on Kindle for free or like for $1, which is so fun. This I did buy because I wanted the pretty cover, but I wouldn't be surprised if this one you can find online. Of course, I've seen the Headless Horseman in the Boo Parade at Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party at Walt Disney World. He rides along before the parade and he's very spooky with his pumpkin head. And I've seen the Disney cartoon as well, which now I'm thinking I definitely need to go and rewatch that. But I never read the original and it was really fun. It was definitely quirky and not like a true ghost story. It wasn't like a, oh, everything is absolutely terrifying and horrifying, which there was a challenge for that too, so don't worry, we'll get to those books. But I can definitely see how it wasn't too hard to sort of Disneyify Sleepy Hollow because it was already a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Like Ichabod Crane, the schoolmaster, is already like a little bit of a bumbling fellow. He likes to read ghost stories and they kind of carry him away. He's basically like Catherine Morland in that way from Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. So there's a Disney cartoon based on Sleepy Hollow, but then there's also a Sleepy Hollow refreshments area at Liberty Square inside of Walt Disney World. They have really delicious funnel cakes and waffles, and one kind of funny thing I noticed in Washington Irving's original, Legend of Sleepy Hollow is that food actually is a huge theme. Like there's this description of the party that Ichabod goes to, and like these like sideboards groaning with pies and meats and desserts and ciders, and like, oh my gosh, it just sounds like the most delicious autumnal feast. Definitely not a book to read on an empty stomach. It was super charming though. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. It's such a quick read. Anyway, speaking of food, maybe we should head inside and grab a snack and we could talk about the next challenge from the Bookish Readathon. Alright, I got us a nice cup of tea right here. Fill her up. I also rated the candy drawer. I don't think these Kit Kats are quite as good as normal Kit Kats. They're the orange ones. Also, is it just me? So this is apparently supposed to be glow in the dark, but I think it's just the packaging, but somehow I feel like maybe the chocolate itself is glow in the dark, and so the chocolate itself must taste different. And I somehow feel like the Reese's Cups I've eaten from the glow in the dark packaging have not tasted quite as good as normal Reese's Cups. I don't know if that's just like a mental thing or actual thing. My favorite are the Reese's Cups stuffed with Reese's Pieces. Those are really good, but I couldn't find any of those, so we'll settle for a Kit Kat instead. So, another challenge of the Bookish Readathon was the Candy Cauldron Pumpkin Spice Challenge, which was read something cozy and sweet, which I feel like maybe I should have put a disclaimer in there that like, that doesn't mean it has to be like frilly and fluffy. I feel like books can be cozy and sweet and yet still challenging and still have a lot of depth to them. For instance, this month I read The Jeweler's Shop by Pope John Paul II. It's actually a play. It deals with marriage. It's fairly short. I read it all on one cozy, rainy afternoon, and it was just beautiful. I didn't realize how much I was gonna love it, and it was definitely challenging. It almost was like a sort of what's the word for that type of voice? Like a stream of consciousness style of narration. Like almost reminded me of like Virginia Woolf style a little bit. Marriage, of course, is a big theme and that's dealt with so beautifully, but it also just goes beyond that, and so many cool reflections on just being a human and living a good life. So anyway, I don't know if that one would count for this challenge or not. It certainly was cozy sitting on the couch on a rainy day reading it with a cup of tea. I feel like I need to go back to it and like copy out different passages because there were so many great things to think about. The book that I mentioned in my Bookish Readathon TBR was this one, The Witch Family by Eleanor Estes. This is a children's book. It fits the bill in a more obvious way. It's very sweet and very charming, but in a perfectly Halloween-y kind of way. Amy and Clarissa are two little girls who live on Garden Lane. They're best friends, and Amy loves to hear stories about Old Witch, and one day Amy decides to banish and vanquish Old Witch to this glass hill, but then she kind of relents and ends up sending Old Witch some company. The little witch girl, you can see her there on the cover, soon arrives, and soon a whole witch family emerges. There's Malachi, the magic bumblebee, spelling bee, actually, so he spells out everything he wants to say. I also just love the sort of structure of it because it's obvious that Amy and Clarissa, Amy especially, is kind of telling this story and creating this story, but then sometimes the story seems to go to beyond her powers, and it's just woven together in such a cool way. Such a lovely Halloween read. My mom used to read this to us around Halloween growing up, so it was really fun to come back to it. I also, at the beginning of October, was reading some Lord Peter mysteries by, I almost said by Harriet Vane, by Dorothy Sayers. Harriet Vane. The Harriet Vane Lord Peter mysteries are so good, and I haven't reread them recently, and I'd really like to. I actually was reading some of the earlier Lord Peter novels that don't have Harriet Vane in them yet, so Clouds of Witness was so good. I also liked Whose Body. Lord Peter is so great. His study and his apartment in London, and just the way he goes sleuthing, he has such a cool sense of humor, and Dorothy Sayers is just such a good writer. Like, reading her books, you just sort of stand in awe because she's so clever, she's so well read, she's constantly dropping allusions and references that like you don't even understand. Like, probably she's the only person who understood it because it's probably just some like 13th century Italian mystic. So I know I have 2 more challenges to tell you guys about. I also have a pumpkin that I haven't carved yet, so let's go do that. With a witch hat next to it. I did do a little sketch. It's under here somewhere. In a initially I was thinking of bats, but then I went with a small witch hat instead. Here's the finished product. Cat looking very spooky. Witch hat off to the side. Sickle moon. Oh hey, this book right here. Sorry, I didn't actually read this for the Bookish Readathon, but after I filmed my announcement video, I was realizing it would have been such a great book. It's like Jane Austen and magic combined, super spooky, super long, but really good writing. Now I'm kind of tempted to reread this, or maybe I'll save it for next Halloween. The next challenge of the Bookish Readathon that Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell would have been very good for is the Madame Leota's Library Challenge. This was to pick a book that you think would be in the library at the Haunted Mansion that has very ghoulish, happy haunts kind of vibes. I feel like Sleepy Hollow could definitely be in the library at the Haunted Mansion. Also the Lord Peter Mysteries. But I did read two just for this challenge. One of them was a ghost story by Edith Wharton. It was Bewitched, which was actually really cool to read that and Sleepy Hollow at the same time because they're both set kind of in the New England area, off in these sort of remote farms where like people are very superstitious. Edith Wharton was definitely much more of a real ghost story, although even Bewitched was a little bit like had like kind of a little bit of ambiguity to it where it's like it could have been a ghost or it could have been explained by a human. It's set, I think it's set in the winter in the snow and it feels very cold, and I felt that way about Edith Wharton's writing before. It's beautiful. She's an amazing writer, and sometimes the way she describes things, like she just captures like some situation you've been in so perfectly or some quirk of character. She just gets it down on paper in this amazing way. But especially in her fiction, I just haven't felt a lot of warmth. I haven't read enough of her fiction. I definitely want to read more. I have read her letters, and those I feel like are a little bit warmer. But like Custom of the Country, I mentioned that earlier in the Bookish Readathon because the main character of that is kind of like the ghost bride in the Haunted Mansion. She just goes through husbands like that, and this story had a similar kind of chilliness, which for a ghost story really works. It was a quick read. The other book that I read or tried to read for Madame Leota's Library was Dracula by Bram Stoker. This was also a crossover with Bigtober. So Dracula, so kind of like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, like the word Dracula has become sort of a coinage in popular culture. Dracula's a vampire, we all kind of know that. I didn't really know much about the story. I didn't realize it's like broken up into like diary entries and letters and newspaper articles, so like story slowly builds, although I kind of felt like it went on for too long. As all this evidence is mounting and mounting, it didn't mean a lot to me because it's like, well, I already know where this is going, you know? At first, I was actually surprised at kind of how quickly it moved because I thought like just the first segment was gonna be like basically the entirety of the novel, because the first segment this character goes to visit Count Dracula at his castle in Transylvania. And for some reason I had this idea that most of the book would take place at the castle, which did not end up being the case because that portion ended pretty quickly. So yeah, I did feel like it dragged a little bit. There was some good writing. In the end though, it just got too creepy for me. I'm more of a happy haunts kind of girl. Like I like the Haunted Mansion because it's a little silly, because it's not truly like horror. I do not read horror stories. I'm not into that genre. So probably unsurprisingly, blood-sucking undead aspect of Dracula was just too much for me, and I decided it wasn't worth it to finish. I don't know, and the characters came across as kind of flat. It was difficult to relate to them. When the guy is traveling to meet the Count and he's like in the little towns, you know, leading up to the Count's castle, and like the people, when he tells them who he's going to see, like freak out and start crossing themselves and like beg him not to go. See, if that was me, I would like maybe pause on my travels and figure out just why everyone freaks out at the mere mention of this stranger's name before I went to his castle. Or like there's this girl and she gets mysteriously sick and seems to have a lot of blood loss, and the doctors are like, you know, trying to sit up with her all night. And it's like, if I were that girl, I would not just be like, oh, la-di-da, I'm fine, I'm feeling so much better, these little garlicky flowers, I'm sure I don't need them. Like, I would be concerned. I would be like, so why am I losing so much blood? Why am I sleepwalking? What is going on here? If you're planning to read Dracula and don't want the particulars of the story spoiled, then skip ahead now. This is your spoiler warning. I am about to spoil it. So particularly in the case of that girl, obviously, Dracula was out to get her. Every night she was mysteriously losing blood, and this went on forever, like forever and ever and ever. And she had 3 suitors who were like completely in love with her, these 3 great guys, right? She's only in love with one of them, so she's engaged to him. As the doctors are trying to cure her, like oftentimes they're sort of thwarted and they like arrive at the last minute and she needs an emergency blood transfusion. And so these 3 guys who loved her all give her a blood transfusion, and this foreign doctor, he gives her a blood transfusion, and like they had saved her so many times, like so many times, that I was sure Bram Stoker was not going to just kill her off, because it's like, they've saved her 20 times. Why would he let Dracula finally get her? But Mr. Bram Stoker was not kind to her. Not only did she die, she then became a vampire. And the 3 guys who were in love with her had to go and like cut off her head and put the stake through her heart. And see, I spoiled it for myself. When I saw things starting to go that way, I went on Wikipedia just to see, like, do I really want to read the rest of this? And I realized that, no, I don't really want to read the rest of this. I'm glad I gave it a try. Now I know. My mom was telling me that my grandmother watched the Dracula movie one time and, like, hated it and wished she hadn't watched it. So that makes me feel a little bit better. Like I said, though, I'm just not a horror reader. That kind of book just is not my jam. So Dracula was never going to be a favorite for me. But it probably does belong in the Haunted Mansion, because I think that's what makes that ride so popular, is that it walks this fine line between like truly creepy and kind of cozy creepy. Another book for the Madame Leota Challenge that I downloaded to my Kindle but never got to start, and maybe I'll end up reading it in November, I don't know, was Udolpho by Mrs. Radcliffe. If you're a fan of Jane Austen and you've read Northanger Abbey, you'll know that Catherine Morland, the Ichabod Crane type, she reads a ton of Mrs. Radcliffe, and I've never actually read Mrs. Radcliffe. I've read lots of other contemporaries of Jane Austen, like Fanny Burney is really good, and Maria Edgeworth, but Mrs. Radcliffe has been on my list, so maybe I'll get to that in November. I kind of want to look that up though and make sure it's not as creepy as Dracula, because the last challenge in the Bookish Readathon was the Monsieur Lecoq group read. Monsieur Lecoq is a French novel by Émile Gabriel. It was written in the Victorian period, so kind of another crossover for Victober. Monsieur Lecoq is the original Sherlock Holmes. He came before Arthur Conan Doyle, and I think Arthur Conan Doyle did read him, even though he cast shade at him in some of the Sherlock Holmes stories. I think I actually preferred Monsieur Lecoq to Sherlock Holmes. I just felt like the book was warmer, like the characters came off as more real and more well-rounded, and Sherlock Holmes is very much like focused on the mystery and like unraveling it, and Monsieur Lecoq has a great mystery too and is also like into all the steps, but there are also lots of little asides, little funny things that aren't necessarily tied into the main mystery, but just round out the characters more and are just these like funny, sweet moments. I love Monsieur Lecoq's Watson. He is Father Absinthe. He's called that because he enjoys absinthe a little too much, and he's like totally blown away by Monsieur Lecoq's deductions, and lots of people don't believe Monsieur Lecoq. That was one thing I really enjoyed about this novel, as opposed to like Sherlock Holmes, is that you're seeing Monsieur Lecoq at the very beginning of his career. Before he became a detective, he would spend his spare time kind of dreaming up all these schemes and like all these ways you could make money and like never get caught. And one day he told his boss about them, and his boss looked at him and was like, "You could become either a great criminal or a great detective. Choose." So of course he decides to become a detective, and this really complicated mystery that he has to unravel is just so fascinating. There were just so many cool little characters. Like there's a cab man. He is chasing down these 2 women who obviously are kind of accomplices to the murder, and he traces them to the cab that took them through town. The driver is basically horrified that he, even unwittingly helped the murderer, that he insists to Monsieur Lecoq that he will give him the same amount of time in his taxi cab, give to Monsieur Lecoq for free, so he's like always showing up at his door. And offering to take him around Paris. Monsieur Lecoq often starts the day with a matutinal chocolate, which I think is kind of the best thing ever. I think I should have a matutinal chocolate every morning. One thing I didn't realize about Monsieur Lecoq is that it is actually 2 volumes. So the first volume is titled Monsieur Lecoq, and the second volume is titled The Honor of the Name. The second volume really gets to the bottom of the mystery. Although I think the first volume does kind of stand on its own, because you do like basically figure out who are the main players in this mystery, like what is going on. The roots of the murder in Monsieur Lecoq go so much deeper, go like literally generations back in this family, so the honor of the name takes you generations back and introduces all these different characters and shows you how they're all connected. Especially when I was just starting to read it was so fascinating because so many of the names you recognize from Monsieur Lecoq, and you would hear them in these brand new contexts and you weren't sure who everybody was, and was this the character from Monsieur Lecoq or was it his father? It was very dramatic, the honor of the name. It was like worthy of Bollywood. It was just insane, like revenge and plotting and passion, and it was kind of the fallout of the French Revolution. Monsieur Lecoq appears only very briefly in the honor of the name. The first volume is really his volume. I did miss him a little bit. I think I preferred the first volume to the second volume. Although the second volume was fun too, and I feel like it was a great Impression de France read, because in Monsieur Lecoq, he's like running all around Paris. The chase scene towards the end I thought was so cool, like, because he like almost loses the guy a couple times and they like just go in and out of every corner of Paris. And then the second volume takes place in the French countryside, so it's like these beautiful descriptions of like the chateaus and the villages, which Impression de France has. Impression de France goes from the Provençal countryside to Paris. I really enjoyed Monsieur Lecoq, and I would definitely love to read some more of Émile Gabriel. I think that Monsieur Lecoq makes like kind of guest appearances in some of the other novels by Émile Gabriel, so I kind of want to check that out. Should I tell you guys something sad? So I actually filmed a Monsieur Lecoq review with my brother Athos, because he actually is the one who originally suggested we do Monsieur Lecoq for the group read. I filmed it while we were at Disney World. I have uploaded my Food and Wine and Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party vlogs if you hadn't caught those yet. It was a pretty quick trip, like just over the weekend, so one morning at the Grand Floridian, we went out on the balcony and I set up my camera. Unfortunately, right below us, they were cleaning the pavement with these like big giant like vacuum cleaners for concrete. Power washers, I guess. Anyway, they were very loud. I was hoping that they were far enough away that like it wouldn't impact the audio, but like it was really, really bad. So unfortunately I had to scrap that video, and Athos is not here to give his thoughts, but I think most of the things that I just talked about were basically the same stuff that we talked about in the video. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed the readathon. Major props if you joined in and posted about it. I really loved hearing from you all. Hope you have a very happy and spooky and magical Halloween. I'll talk to you guys again soon.